He thought it was love, but on their wedding night, her hands trembled, her eyes avoided his, and behind every silence was a secret. She married him to protect someone she loved, and lied every single day to keep him safe. Now, the truth is out. A dangerous man from her past is back, watching their every move, and the man she deceived. He has to decide if love is stronger than betrayal. This story is about trust shattered, love tested, and a fight for freedom that will leave you breathless. If you believe love deserves a second chance, comment, "Love is stronger than lies." The ceremony was dazzling. Chandeliers sparkled like stars over the marble hall, and classical music floated softly in the air. Every detail was planned with obsessive precision, but nothing shone brighter than the bride. She walked down the aisle with a serene smile, her lace gown hugging her silhouette like it had been sewn onto her skin. Guests whispered in disbelief. The city's most powerful millionaire, reserved, sharp, impossible to conquer, was finally married. And not to a socialite or heiress, but to a woman whose charm was as quiet as it was magnetic. "She's so delicate," one guest murmured. "Too perfect," another whispered. Standing at the altar, he watched her with a mix of pride and curiosity. Her hand slid into his with grace. She smiled again, but this time her eyes didn't smile with her. That night, in the honeymoon suite, the silence came slowly, like fog rolling in after a storm. The penthouse was elegant, breathtaking, yet as she slipped off her heels and turned her back to him, the air grew heavy. Every movement she made was precise, too precise. She unclasped her necklace slowly, her fingers trembling just enough for him to notice. He didn't say a word. He simply watched, sitting on the edge of the bed, the weight of something unnamed pressing against his chest. She entered the bathroom, and he exhaled deeply. There was something in the way she avoided his eyes, the way she kept a smile on her lips, but tension in her shoulders. When she returned, he was placing a framed photo of the two of them, taken that morning, on the nightstand. The moment she saw it, her breath caught for a second. Barely noticeable, but it was there. He turned to her. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice low, sincere. She held his gaze for a second too long before looking away. "I'm here, aren't I?" she replied softly, her voice almost a whisper. Then she climbed into bed, facing the window, her back to him. He lay beside her, eyes wide open in the dark, listening to the quiet between them, a quiet that wasn't peaceful, a quiet that held something back. But what exactly did she mean by that? The private dinner was meant to be intimate, a celebration of their new life together. Close friends and a few carefully selected family members gathered at their estate, where candles flickered in crystal holders and laughter echoed gently beneath the vaulted ceilings. Waiters moved like shadows between the guests, offering wine and delicacies on silver trays. From the outside, it was a perfect evening, elegant, sophisticated, controlled. He watched her as she floated among the guests, always smiling, always polite. She looked beautiful, radiant even, but he had begun to notice the subtle things. How her fingers never fully relaxed around her champagne flute. How she turned her body slightly away when someone approached her too quickly. How her laugh always came a beat late. When she returned to his side at the table, he rested his hand lightly on hers. She didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back either. Her eyes darted toward the large glass windows, like she was watching for something. The conversation shifted naturally, meandering through business, travel, and memories of old parties. Then someone, he couldn't even remember who, mentioned the name. "Gabriel always said you hated red wine," a woman commented with a laugh, looking at her. And just like that, everything changed. Her fork slipped from her hand, clattering against her plate. The room didn't fall silent, but her reaction was loud enough to draw a few glances. She blinked twice, quickly, and forced a smile. "I guess tastes change," she said, brushing it off with a faint laugh. But her voice trembled, only for a second, but enough for him to notice. After dinner, he tried to take her hand as they walked down the hallway, but she stepped just slightly ahead. When he spoke, she nodded, but said nothing. It was almost midnight when he found her. She stood alone near the stairs, dim light casting long shadows on the marble floor. She wasn't crying, not quite, but her eyes were red, and her hand clutched the banister like she was holding herself upright. "Hey," he said gently, "everything okay?" She didn't turn to him. "Just a long day," she answered, her voice too calm. "I think I'm still getting used to everything." "You dropped your fork when someone mentioned Gabriel." That made her turn. Her expression froze, not with fear, but with calculation, as if trying to measure how much truth to give. "It's nothing," she said. "Just an old name I hadn't heard in years." He let it go, for now. That night, as she stood under the warm water of the shower, humming softly to herself, he sat on the bed with his laptop open. He typed the name and her hometown into the search bar, feeling a strange twist in his stomach as he waited for the results to load. There wasn't much. A few outdated social media profiles, an old yearbook scan, a vague article about a missing man. No photo, no connection that he could prove, but enough to plant doubt in his mind. He scrolled through page after page, drawn deeper into questions he hadn't known to ask before. Why had she never mentioned Gabriel? Why did her hands shake when his name was spoken? Why did she look like someone who was always listening for footsteps behind her? She stepped out of the bathroom in her robe, drying her hair with a towel. He shut the laptop quickly and smiled at her. "Everything okay?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yeah, just catching up on emails." She didn't press further. She never did. Later, after she had fallen asleep beside him, her breathing slow and even, he walked over to her wardrobe. He didn't know what he was looking for, something small, something that explained all the little things she refused to say out loud. He searched gently, not wanting to disturb anything, not yet. Inside her purse, tucked beneath a makeup pouch, he found it. A folded note, small, worn at the edges like it had been unfolded and reread a dozen times. He hesitated, then opened it. "Don't forget why you married him." His throat tightened. The handwriting was elegant, controlled, definitely not hers, and definitely not his. He stared at it for a long time, trying to make sense of the words. The meaning was too clear, too cruel. It wasn't a love note, it was a warning, a reminder. He returned everything to its place, walked to the window, and stood in the dark for what felt like an hour. The room behind him was quiet, peaceful, on the surface. But the silence that stretched between them had taken on a new shape. It wasn't just the awkwardness of two people learning to share a life. It was the silence of a secret growing too large to be hidden much longer. He climbed back into bed, staring at the ceiling. She stirred slightly, murmuring something in her sleep. He turned toward her, watching her face, so calm, so innocent in the moonlight. And yet, who wrote the note? Why did she keep it? And what truth was she hiding behind those silent smiles and perfectly timed tears? He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face, then pulled his hand back before it touched her skin. This wasn't curiosity anymore, it was fear. From the moment he read that note, something in him shifted. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a gnawing unease, a whisper that something wasn't as it seemed, and maybe never had been. He had married a woman who, on the surface, fit into his life so seamlessly, elegant, composed, discreet, but now every glance, every pause, every carefully measured word made him question what lay beneath that perfect facade. He started observing her differently, not like a husband admires a wife, but like a man trying to solve a puzzle he didn't know he'd been handed. She woke early every morning, wrapped herself in a robe, and made tea with the same ritual precision. She would often sit by the window, lost in thought, eyes fixed on nothing. He used to think it was just peacefulness. Now he wondered if she was watching, waiting, fearing something he couldn't see. At first, He told himself it was just imagination, that he was overreacting, letting one anonymous note and a tremble at dinner turn into suspicion. But then came the whispers. Twice that week, he caught her speaking in low tones on the phone, in the farthest corner of the house. The first time, she ended the call as soon as he entered the room. The second time, he lingered behind a wall, listening carefully. "I can't lie to him much longer," she said. That was all he heard before she hung up. He stood there for several seconds, heart pounding. That night, as they lay in bed, she turned toward him and brushed her fingers lightly across his chest. Her voice was soft, tender. "You've been distant," she said. "Have I?" he replied, careful not to sound cold. She nodded. "Is everything okay?" He paused, studied her. There was genuine concern in her eyes. Or was it fear? "I just have a lot on my mind," he said. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, holding her as she drifted off to sleep. But even in that moment of closeness, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was holding someone who didn't fully belong to him. Someone who had built walls within herself so thick he might never reach the center. The following afternoon, when she went out to visit a gallery with friends, he returned to the room she kept locked. She had a study she rarely used in front of him, a small, quiet room filled with antique books, handwritten journals, and framed sketches of places she said she wanted to visit. But one drawer in her desk was always locked. She said it was where she kept private letters, things from her late parents, memories too personal to share. He had respected that boundary until now. It took him several minutes to find the small key, tucked behind a loose panel in a drawer she thought no one would look in. His hands trembled slightly as he unlocked it. Not out of guilt, not anymore, but out of dread. Inside, he found a stack of documents. At first glance, nothing alarming, just old mail, utility bills from before she met him. But then he saw the names, different surnames, different addresses. A copy of a passport with her photo, but a name he had never heard before. And then, beneath those papers, a photograph. It was her, younger, with shorter hair, no makeup, standing next to a man he didn't recognize. They weren't smiling. They looked serious, almost tense. His blood ran cold. The name Gabriel was written on the back of the photograph in black ink. He sat down, staring at it, trying to piece together the fragments. Was this Gabriel the same man mentioned at dinner? Who was he? A friend, a brother, a lover? He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but how could he not? Nothing made sense anymore. The more he tried to understand her, the more layers unraveled, revealing a person who felt farther and farther from the woman he thought he married. When she returned that evening, she found him in the study, the drawer locked again, the photo hidden. He looked calm, but inside his mind raced with questions. She smiled, kissed his cheek. "The exhibition was beautiful," she said, removing her coat. He nodded. "I'm glad." She poured herself a glass of wine, leaned against the counter. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked. "Just tired." She hesitated, then walked over to him, touched his arm. "Tell me if something's wrong." "Would you tell me?" he asked, his tone so even it made her freeze. There was a pause, a long one, before she answered. "Yes," she said. "Of course I would." That night, he didn't sleep beside her. He told her he had emails to catch up on and went to the guest room. She didn't argue. She didn't ask him to stay. But she lingered at the doorway for a long time after he closed the door. He sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, staring at the wall. Was their entire relationship a lie? Or was there a truth buried so deep inside her that she couldn't find the courage to let it out? The next morning, she acted as though nothing had happened, made breakfast, asked about his meetings, kissed him goodbye at the door. He watched her carefully, wondering how someone could live with so much composure while hiding so much inside. Later that day, he reached out to a private investigator, discreet, reliable, someone he'd worked with before on corporate matters. "I need information," he said, quietly, I don't want her knowing." He gave the investigator her former name, the one on the old passport, and waited. Over the next few days, things between them were calm on the surface, but the distance grew. They spoke in smiles, in half-conversations, their hands brushed but didn't linger. Their kisses were polite, mechanical. One evening, as they shared dinner at home, she watched him closely. "I miss you," she said. He looked at her. "I'm right here." "No, you're not," she said, her voice low. "You've gone somewhere and I can't reach you." He wanted to scream, to tell her he'd gone exactly where she had pushed him, into shadows, into silence, into suspicion. But instead, he said, "Then bring me back." She said nothing. That night, as he lay in the guest room again, the investigator called. "I've found something," the man said. "Nothing criminal, but troubling. She changed her name 3 years ago. The man in the photo, Gabriel, he's not missing. He's in prison. Fraud, identity theft, threats. They were romantically involved for a time." He froze. "Are they still in contact?" "I can't say for sure. But someone deposited money into his commissary account last month under her old alias." He thanked the man and ended the call, hands cold. He didn't know what was worse, that she had been involved with a criminal, or that she had never once told him the truth. Everything in him ached to confront her, but something told him not to. Not yet. Instead, he sat in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the house, and wondered how long two people could live under the same roof while carrying separate lives. The following day, he watched her closely again. Every movement, every blink. Was she the woman who had cried during their vows? Or the one who had lied with every word? He didn't know anymore. All he knew was that the woman sleeping beside him was no stranger to secrets, and he was running out of patience, waiting for the truth. The rain began before sunset, heavy, steady, and relentless, as though the sky itself was trying to wash away something it couldn't name. Thunder cracked like a warning overhead, and lightning flashed across the horizon, illuminating the glass walls of their penthouse in brief, jarring intervals. He sat alone in the living room, drink untouched in his hand, his thoughts moving faster than the storm outside. The truth sat inside him like a stone, heavy and sharp, pressing into everything. Gabriel, prison, her silence, her lies, the name that changed everything. She hadn't said much that day. Her usual soft chatter was gone, replaced by glances, careful, measured. She had felt the shift. She didn't need to be told that the atmosphere had thickened between them, that every word exchanged was laced with things left unsaid. She moved around the apartment like a ghost, quiet, present, but somehow unreachable. When the lights flickered briefly due to the storm, she appeared in the doorway of the living room, barefoot, her long hair loose over her shoulders, wearing a simple sweater and leggings. She looked young like that, fragile, human. "You haven't said more than 10 words to me all day," she said softly. He looked up at her, eyes dark. "There's not much left to say." She swallowed, stepped into the room. "There is. You just won't let me say it." He set the glass down, stood, his voice low and firm. "Then say it." For a long moment, she didn't move, just stared at him, rain cascading behind her like a curtain. Then, wordlessly, she turned and walked toward the balcony doors. He followed. Outside, the rain hit them instantly, soaking them both within seconds. She didn't seem to care. She walked to the edge of the balcony, her arms wrapped around herself. Thunder rolled again in the distance, deep and threatening. He stayed near the door, the cold wind hitting his face. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you lie to me?" She turned around slowly, her eyes glistening, not with rain, but with something deeper. "Because I didn't have a choice," she said. "Everyone has a choice." "No, they don't," she said, voice trembling. "Not when someone else's life is on the line." He stepped closer, trying to read her. "Who?" "My brother." The name fell from her lips like a confession. "He's the only family I have left." she continued, voice shaking. "And Gabriel, he found him, said he'd hurt him if I didn't do what he asked." "And what did he ask you to do?" His voice cracked despite himself. "To marry you," she whispered. Lightning lit up her face. Her eyes were red, raw. She wasn't crying, but she was close. Her whole body trembled now, from the cold, or the fear, or the weight of finally saying it out loud. "I didn't know who you were," she said. "Not really. I was just told to get close to you, that being married to you would give me legal protections. Status, that Gabriel couldn't touch me then, and he'd let my brother go." He stared at her, thunder echoing behind his silence. "I didn't mean to fall for you," she whispered. "That wasn't part of the plan." He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "So there was a plan." "There was blackmail," she snapped. "There were threats. There were people who had nothing left to lose. I did what I had to do. And now," she stepped closer, soaked through but fierce, "now I'm standing here, telling you the truth when I know it might destroy everything." He looked away, struggling to breathe through the fury and disbelief tangled in his chest. "You lied to me every single day. I lied to protect the only person I had left," she said, "and then I stayed to protect something else." "What?" "You," she said, her voice breaking. "Us." He turned back toward her. His face was unreadable. "How can I ever trust anything you've said? Because I'm telling you now," she said. "When I could have kept hiding, when I could have run." He shook his head. "You should have told me the truth the moment it became more than a game." "I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that if I told you everything, you'd walk away, that you wouldn't believe me, that you'd look at me like you are right now, like I'm nothing." He closed his eyes, breathing hard. She stepped closer, so close he could feel her warmth even through the rain. "I didn't plan to fall in love with you," she said again. "But I did. Somewhere between the silence and the guilt, I started seeing you not as the man I was forced to marry, but as the man I wanted to stay with." He opened his eyes. "I don't know if that's enough for you," she said, "but it's all I have left to offer." He stared at her for a long time, something flickering in his gaze, something uncertain, wounded, but still burning. Behind her, headlights flashed on the wet street below. They both turned instinctively, and his eyes narrowed. A black car sat parked across the road, not moving, no engine hum, no signal, just waiting. Inside, behind the tinted glass, a figure sat motionless. His stomach dropped. "How long has that car been there?" he asked. Her voice was barely audible. "Since yesterday." "You knew." "I didn't want to believe it was him." "Gabriel?" She nodded. He stepped back inside, grabbed his phone, and started dialing. She followed, panicked. "No," she said. "If you call the police, he'll disappear again. He'll come back later. He always comes back." "Then what do you want me to do?" he snapped, spinning around. "Let him sit there. Let him watch us. Wait for him to make his move." She didn't answer. He hung up the call before it connected, tossed the phone on the couch and paced the room. The rain had grown louder, as if the storm had found its voice. He turned toward her again. "What exactly does he want from you?" "I don't know anymore," she said. "Control, revenge, money. He just wants to remind me that I'll never be safe." "And what do you want?" She stepped toward him, close, her hands clenched into fists. "I want to be free. I want to stop looking over my shoulder. I want to stop hurting the only man who's ever looked at me like I wasn't broken." He exhaled. A long silence stretched between them, only the rain speaking for both of them. Then he said, "You should have told me everything from the beginning. I know. I could have protected you. I didn't believe you'd want to." She stepped closer again, her eyes full of tears now. "But I believe it now." He didn't move, not toward her, not away, just stood there watching her fall apart. She whispered, "Say something." He looked at her for a long time, then spoke with a voice she barely recognized. "You're not who I thought you were." She nodded, the pain in her face impossible to hide. "But I don't think you know who you are anymore either." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone, soaked, shaking, and stripped of every last secret. The next morning the sky was clear, as if the storm had never happened, but the air inside the penthouse was heavy, like the silence between them had taken on physical weight. She moved through the kitchen in slow, measured steps, her hands shaky as she poured coffee into 2 mugs. He didn't come out of the bedroom. She didn't call him. The car across the street was gone, but its absence felt more like a threat than a relief. She sat alone at the kitchen island, staring into her untouched cup, the events of the previous night looping in her mind. Her confession, his reaction, the way he had looked at her, not with hate, but with something far worse, disappointment, betrayal, a kind of devastation she couldn't fix with apologies. He finally emerged around noon, showered and dressed, but not looking at her. "I need to talk to you," she said quietly. He didn't sit, just stood across from her, arms folded. "I'm listening." She hesitated. "Last night wasn't just about me finally telling you the truth. It was about choosing you. I need you to know that—" "I don't need your words right now," he said flatly. "I need a plan. I need to know what we're dealing with." She blinked, caught off guard. "A plan? Gabriel is watching us. You think he's going to stop? He won't, and you know it." She nodded. "No, he won't. Then we fight back," he said. "Together. If you want this marriage, if you want me, then we stop pretending, and we start acting." A beat passed between them. "I want this," she said. "I want you more than I ever expected to." He nodded once. "Then here's what we're going to do." For the first time since the wedding, they spoke like partners. He laid out the pieces, the private investigator he had hired, the limited information they had on Gabriel's whereabouts, the financial transactions made under her old alias. She filled in the rest, the threats Gabriel had made, the leverage he held over her, and the web of manipulation he'd spun around her for years. "We need to expose him," he said, "not just get rid of him. If we don't bring him down completely, he'll keep coming back." She looked up. "I know how to lure him out." He raised an eyebrow. "He's obsessed with control. If he thinks I'm slipping away, that I'm building a life without him, he'll react. If I go public with you, truly public, he'll see it as a challenge. You want to use our marriage as bait?" She nodded. "It's already been used as a cage. Might as well turn it into a weapon." He smiled for the first time in days. "You're stronger than I thought." "I had to be," she said. "I just never had anyone willing to stand beside me. Until now." They spent the next few days putting everything into motion. The investigator compiled documents. A lawyer quietly began gathering evidence to file restraining orders and press charges. And she wrote a statement, a public declaration of love and truth, carefully worded, to be shared during a high society charity gala they had planned to attend weeks before. "It has to be then," she said. "He'll be there, watching." "He won't just watch," the investigator warned. "He'll act." "Let him," the millionaire said. "That's exactly what we want." The night of the gala arrived, and the city's elite filled the grand ballroom of the Carlton Hotel. Chandeliers sparkled overhead. Waiters in black moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. But beneath the glamour, there was a current of tension that only 2 people in the room could feel. He wore a black tuxedo, crisp and tailored, the picture of poise. She stood at his side in a deep emerald gown, her hair pinned up, diamonds on her neck, beautiful and unshakable. No one would guess that beneath the surface, their entire world teetered on the edge of collapse. As they greeted guests and smiled for photographers, she felt his hand squeeze hers gently. "Ready?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "Let's finish this." The speeches began as the dinner was served. Donors were thanked. Future plans announced. Then the host invited him to the stage. He stepped up to the microphone, glanced at the crowd, then at her, and he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm, confident. "Tonight, I'm not speaking as a businessman. I'm not here as a sponsor or a donor. I'm here as a husband." A ripple of curiosity moved through the room. I've spent my life building things, companies, legacies, wealth, but none of that means anything if it's built on lies. I married a woman who carries with her a past she didn't choose, a past that's tried to control her, break her, silence her, but tonight she's here, standing beside me, not as someone hiding, but as someone ready to speak. The audience was silent now. The clinking of silverware halted mid-air. She was threatened, blackmailed, manipulated into a life she never wanted, and the man who did it is in this room. Gasps. He scanned the crowd, his eyes steady. You know who you are, and so do I. The security team, previously positioned discreetly, began moving. Across the room, near the back wall, a man stood. He wore a grey suit, a drink in his hand, his expression unreadable, but his eyes, they burned with fury. Gabriel. She saw him the same moment the security guards did. She didn't move, didn't flinch. Just watched as they surrounded him, instructed him to drop his phone, to show his hands. He resisted. For a second, it looked like he might try to run, but the doors were already blocked. Within moments, he was restrained, handcuffed, and escorted out of the ballroom. The room erupted in whispers, flashes from cameras, murmurs of scandal. She stood still, watching him disappear. He turned to her as the guests looked on. She didn't wait for the cue. She walked up the steps and joined him on the stage. I didn't ask for this life, she said, her voice clear, trembling but proud. But I chose to stop running. I chose to tell the truth. And I chose him. The applause began slowly. Then it grew, until the whole room stood. She turned to him, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, she said, right there in front of everyone. For the lies, for the fear, for everything. He took her hands in his, looked into her eyes. You stayed, he said softly. That's what matters now. They embraced, not as a performance, not for the crowd, but because they needed it, because they'd been holding the weight of secrets for too long, and now they had finally let go. The cameras caught every moment. The headlines the next morning told the story of a power couple who stood together through blackmail and betrayal. But the real story, the one only they knew, was about redemption, and the kind of love that refused to break, even when it had every reason to. Later that night, back in the quiet of their home, she stood barefoot by the window, looking out at the now empty street. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. It's over, she whispered. No, he said, kissing her temple. It's just beginning. They left the city 3 days later. There was no grand farewell, no press release, no security escort, just two people packing their bags in silence, leaving behind a life that had been beautiful on the outside and chaotic at its core. The penthouse stood quiet, the glass walls still smudged from the storm that had passed through, and the marble floors echoed faintly with the ghosts of arguments, secrets, and confessions. They didn't speak much during the drive. She watched the road pass outside her window, the skyline shrinking in the rearview mirror, her hands folded tightly in her lap. He drove with both hands on the wheel, his gaze fixed ahead, his expression unreadable but calmer than it had been in days. The silence between them wasn't empty now. It was full of everything they had survived and everything they still needed to become. Her old town was quiet, surrounded by hills and wind, familiar but distant. When they passed the worn sign at the town's edge, she flinched slightly. She hadn't been back in years. They stayed at a small inn on the outskirts, far from where she had grown up. The staff didn't recognize her. That was part of the plan. Anonymity was a gift, especially now. The next morning, she led him through narrow streets and past shuttered storefronts until they reached a modest brick house with a rusted gate. The curtains were drawn. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Her hand hesitated at the latch. He placed his hand gently over hers. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do, she whispered. The door opened before she could knock. A boy, no older than 16, stood there. His hair was messy, his expression confused for half a second before recognition bloomed. "Clara?" She smiled, lips trembling. "Hey." He stared at her like he wasn't sure if she was real. Then suddenly, without a word, he threw his arms around her. She held him tight, breathed him in. Time collapsed. All the years, all the fear, all the silence, none of it mattered in that moment. When they finally pulled apart, tears ran freely down his face. "You really came back," he said. "I told you I would." She introduced him to her husband. The boy shook his hand with hesitation, but nodded respectfully. "You're the guy," he said. He smiled. "I guess I am." They spent the day at the house. She cooked with her brother like they used to, while her husband helped with repairs around the yard. They laughed, not easily, not yet, but more than either of them had expected. There were no cameras, no threats, no shadows trailing behind them, just life. In the late afternoon, she and her husband walked to a small park nearby, the sun slipping low in the sky. "I didn't think I'd ever come back here," she said, watching children play in the distance. "Why did you?" he asked. "Because the only way to move forward is to stop pretending the past never happened." They sat on a bench in silence for a long while. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "What's that?" "Something from our lawyer," he said. "Your charges, your name change, everything related to Gabriel. It's being cleared. You're officially protected now. Nothing ties you to him anymore." She took the envelope slowly, staring at it. "You did all this." "We did this," he corrected. "Together." The following day, they visited the local courthouse and finalized the paperwork. They paid off lingering debts, closed bank accounts that had once been tied to her aliases, and handed over a full statement to local authorities about Gabriel's crimes. He was being held without bail, awaiting trial. It was over, truly over. Back home, things were different. There was no grand return, no gala, no press interviews. The media had moved on, hungry for new stories, and that suited them just fine. The penthouse felt unfamiliar now. She didn't want to stay there. He didn't either. They sold the apartment within a week. They bought a house outside the city, something smaller, quieter. It had a garden, a porch swing, no glass walls, no security team. Just a place to breathe. In the weeks that followed, life became still again. She began painting, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. He started cooking. They took walks in the morning, held hands at night. They still had scars, both of them, but they stopped trying to hide them. One morning, she stood in the kitchen barefoot, humming softly as she poured water into the coffee maker. The sun warmed her face. The smell of fresh bread lingered from the night before. She didn't hear him come in. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her for a long time. She turned, surprised. "You're up early," she said. "I couldn't sleep." "Nightmare?" "No," he said. "Actually, I was thinking about..." He stepped forward, reaching into his pocket. He knelt slowly, not with the flash of cameras or the pressure of an audience, but with the quiet strength of a man who had waited for the right moment. She gasped softly. In his hand was the same ring. "This time," he said, voice steady, "not for protection, not for safety, not because of threats or secrets, just love. Will you marry me again?" Tears filled her eyes instantly. Her hands covered her mouth, trembling. "Yes," she said. 1,000 times yes. They married again the following weekend. No guests, no cameras, no speeches, just them, barefoot in the grass, standing beneath a tree in their new backyard. She wore a simple dress. He wore a linen shirt. They exchanged new vows, honest and raw. "I promise to never hide again," she said. "I promise to fight for us every day," he replied. They kissed, and the wind blew gently through the trees, carrying away what was left of their old lives. Later that night, she sat beside him on the porch swing, their fingers entwined. "You know what I used to dream of?" she asked. "What?" "A quiet life. A real one. Not a perfect one, just safe, honest, free. He looked at her. You have it now. I have you, she said. That's all I ever needed. The stars were bright overhead, the air filled with the scent of wildflowers and earth. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't have to. Real love, after all, doesn't always need words. Sometimes it just needs truth. Sometimes love doesn't arrive the way we expect it. Sometimes it comes wrapped in pain, shaped by past wounds, tangled in silence and shadows. But when it survives honesty, when it chooses truth over comfort, loyalty over fear, that love becomes unbreakable. What would you have done in his place? Could you forgive a lie built on love? Or would the betrayal be too much? Tell us in the comments. Your thoughts matter, and don't go far. The next story is already on your screen. You won't believe how it begins.